Hey,
What?
welcome.
We're on. And we're back.
Thank you for making the trip up to try this again.
Very, very good.
Yeah. Hopefully our audio quality will be better this time through. We're going to discuss C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, a bit here on the Die Human podcast.
Yes, we are.
Thank you for coming up for the pro-life gala
That
dinner
was
the
great.
other night.
I'll just say to all the viewers, you gave a fantastic talk. It was the talk of the night. It was the talk of the town. Marcus Daly, orator.
Well, no, thank you. And you didn't heckle me, though. You said you were going to heckle
I
me.
said, heckling would also include like throwing rotten fruit and that sort of thing.
There was no fruit.
That was great.
That was,
But it's for a great cause. The Providence Pregnancy Center. Man, oh man, Jessica Frayne doing a great job there. And she gave a great talk.
She did.
And Sister
Dee Dee.
Sister Dee Dee gave a great talk, and you gave a great talk, and it was a great night.
It was. So thanks for making it up off the farm. How is the farm? How are the goats?
The goats are great. We got 5 new goat kids, waiting for 4 or 5 more probably in about 2 weeks. And we just need everyone to pray that it stops raining.
Yeah,
because it's been really raining nonstop for over a year now. And it's I don't know who's in charge of the weather, but somebody should do something about this.
Thankfully, you have that new shelter. That's probably making a huge difference.
Yeah.
And 5 kids. So do Nigerian dwarf goats throw more kids than the average goat?
Yes, they do.
That is a crazy number for
Yeah,
most.
I don't know what the deal is. Maybe because the babies are small, because they are Nigerian.
But so is the mother.
But the mother is also small. But they're known to kick out 4 or 5. In fact, the goat, the mama, has given 6 babies before.
Oh.
In one year. I didn't own her then. Somebody else did, but that's what the owner told me.
Okay.
So, yeah.
She can handle it.
Oh, yeah.
She's done it before.
Yeah.
All right. Have you started milking them?
The babies? No.
I don't know how it works. No. I'm in the city.
Yeah. No, not yet. We're going to leave the babies on Mama's udder for probably, I have to go out of town this weekend. I'm giving a lecture at Providence College in Rhode Island on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so I don't want to stick my wife with milking, because right now it would not only involve milking duties of Mama, it would also involve bottle feeding the babies.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to leave them on Mama for another week, and then I'll start milking.
Get that good, what's the first stuff that comes out? I should know this.
Colostrum.
Get them
colostrum is done.
Antibodies. Okay.
Colostrum's really over after the first 48 hours.
All right.
So
All right.
there you go.
That's
and
it.
Actually, it's beneficial to bottle feed the babies if you intend on keeping them, because then they associate humans with something good.
Yeah, right. They don't end
And
up
because
like
it's
some
no
cranky
good to have a
goats.
dairy goat that will not let you near them.
No, as you found out.
As I did find out, yes.
You're going to keep Foxy, the wayward goat?
Foxy, yeah, well, probably. We'll see what happens. If she's milkable, then we'll keep her. Yeah. Right now, we're just keeping her around, see what babies she gives us in June.
Oh, okay. So she's pregnant too. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, she is.
All right. Well, good. Thanks for catching me up on life on the farm here in
there
the
you
city.
go.
I miss it.
Yes,
miss
you
that
do,
country life.
Mr. Coffinmaker.
Yeah. Well, but thank you for coming to talk about C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, where he gives a wonderful story about a visit, a dream to the outer
The vestibule of heaven,
right.
I think, is the way it's called.
Valley of the Shadow of Life, the vestibule of
The vestibule of heaven. And, the story is fanciful, and Lewis acknowledges it's fanciful. It's not about, marital divorce. It's about the divorce between heaven and hell. And it's cast in the form of, that he had a dream that he eventually wakes up from. And he says, I'm not trying to allude that I'm not making any doctrinal assertions here. Right. Specifically because in the story, as we're going to see, it involves the capacity of those who have died and who are in hell to change their minds and to repent and to go to heaven if they should so choose. Lewis is well aware that for a lot of Christian denominations, that would be considered heretical. Yeah. So, but I think that's actually what he thinks. But
Yeah.
he can't really say, and I think it should be doctrine. He just throws it out here as a kind of fanciful speculation.
And a great tool for us to reflect on the things that we're holding on to while we're still alive that might preclude us from eternal happiness or maybe even temporal happiness.
Absolutely, because as we're going to see, of all the people that are sort of highlighted in the story, all the people that are in hell that get to go to the vestibule of heaven to make this choice, all of them except one, all of them except one, and then one maybe,
Yeah.
choose to go back to hell. And so there's, like
Go
you
back
said,
to those familiar surroundings.
Yeah, that's right.
Comfortable.
So maybe we should set up the story here.
And the Great Divorce, the name comes from, he's responding to William Blake's rating of The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, to try to say, amidst everything else that he's saying here, that heaven and hell cannot be married. There is you cannot blur the lines between heaven and hell, because you will only end up drawing yourself closer to hell if you do that.
Yeah, Lewis was a resolute opponent of spiritualism. And we need to remember when he was writing, this is written in the 40s, and of course he was born in like 1898 or something like that. There was the Romantic movement in the 19th century. And the Romanticists believed, they were pantheists for the most part, that there is no such thing as goodness and evil. It's all the same thing, just it's perspectival. That what some people think is evil is just somebody else's good, blah, blah, blah. And so in this great pantheism that Lewis describes in Mere Christianity, it's beyond good and evil. And so he was a resolute opponent of that. That because he thought that in the light of World War II and the atrocities of the 20th century, we had to be able to point and say, no, this is morally evil and this is morally good.
Yeah.
Whereas the Romanticists just wanted to see God in everything, and
With the idea that, like, it makes life more colorful, and it's not. I mean, I guess Lewis saw where this could actually lead, how deeply dark a place this could go to, especially with modern technology and everything that was involved in World War II.
And so he wants to emphasize there is morality. And if there's morality, there's our capacity to violate that. And if we violate it, what are the consequences? And so that leads him to discuss judgment. What is the afterlife? What is judgment? What is heaven? What is hell? Mm-hmm. And that's really, I think this book is his attempt to answer a lot of those questions.
Yeah, so he walks us through kind of a cast of characters who are getting a chance to glimpse heaven and also then being led to confront what it is that's holding them back and to decide whether or not to take a small step toward heaven, or to continue to white knuckle whatever it is that's keeping them from God.
And it's a master study in moral psychology. Because sort of what Lewis shows us in the stories, he goes through each character's narrative, is how self-justifying and self-rationalizing we all are, and how actually we might have a vague awareness of the moral evil within us, but really deep down inside we kind of view it as natural. This is just who I am.
Yeah, and that's a huge temptation. I mean, we really do. Even those of us who try to put something of a magnifying glass or a microscope over our failings.
It's no big deal. Everybody does it.
Yeah, there's just
God's a God of mercy. I don't have to worry about any of this. You judgmental, finger wagging, people, stop it.
Yeah.
And Lewis is here to say, well, there's something to that. There's something to judgmentalism and finger wagging that we should disparage and say, no, we shouldn't do that. Yeah. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't go the other 9 yards and then end up self-justifying everything. The other thing Lewis was opposed to is the endless, in our society, the endless reduction of moral categories to the realm of the therapeutic. That there's no such thing as good or evil. There's just woundedness or integrity. That you have an integral personality or a disintegrated personality. You're either healthy or wounded.
Huh.
And there's some truth to that, right? Sin wounds us. Sin disintegrates us.
Yeah. But what's the antidote, or what's the
antidote? The antidote is virtue.
Yeah.
And living a morally good life. That's what puts Humpty Dumpty back together again. Not
painkillers, basically,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Not drug-induced anxiety medicines and that kind of thing. I got to turn this phone over. It's distracting me. But anyway, let's get into the story.
Okay. Where would you like to begin? I mean, it just started.
Well,
at the beginning.
let's begin. Why don't you begin this time? Let's begin with a description of hell. What hell is like.
Yeah. Okay. So hell. I mean, it sort of sounds like England.
Yes, on a rainy day.
On a rainy day. Fish and chip shops.
Well, kind of like around here this past week, where every day is cloudy and rainy.
Yeah. And so it sounds like it's sort of just like, a lower, I hesitate even to say like a lower good sort of familiarity, drudgery of just kind of everyday existence of what people are used to without any sort of aspirations toward something that is like truly beyond what they're used to, something that's truly good, truly bright, truly strong, truly magnificent, just sort of an existence, a sort of drudgery existence.
Yeah.
The sort of that's like the physical setting sort of for it is. So, I mean, I think he's waking us up to the fact that like this thing that we can become comfortable with and maybe even try to hold on to like it's the end of our existence is really not all that great.
Yeah, and it's a constant twilight. It's
constant twilight, right?
Never quite night, never quite morning.
Right.
Constant twilight.
And depending on people's perspective, they're thinking, well, maybe the dawn is coming. Like there's the bishop who's like at the hope of the dawn. It's like obviously not. It's just always twilight.
Always twilight. And hell is huge from the perspective of the people in hell.
Right.
In reality, it's quite tiny from the perspective of heaven as we see it, just a little crack in the floor. Yeah. But to the people there, it's huge because you live in a house in this dreary city, but because everything really is simply spiritual and mental there, that all you have to do is have a dispute with your neighbor, a disagreement, and think to yourself, I wish I lived 2 houses down, boom, and you moved, and you lose 2. And of course, you're in hell, so everybody hates everybody, so you're constantly moving. There was apparently, where is it? And there's a bus stop that you're near that goes up to heaven.
Yeah,
if you want to get on the bus and go up to heaven to meet the spirits in heaven, to have this but most people are by now like millions of miles away.
Napoleon is the farthest out that we know of in the story.
Yeah,
right?
tell the Napoleon story.
Yeah, so the Napoleon, so C.S. Lewis, or the narrator, meets people at the bus. He just sees a line. He finds himself in a line. He just hops in it. Like, I wonder where these people are going, curiously. And they all start bickering with each other, and he starts finding his way farther and farther up, happily in the line, because everybody's arguing with each other. They can't stay in the line. They leave. But he has conversations with a few people on the trip or while waiting in line, and he learns that, that Napoleon lives like a couple million miles away from where we and because there's nothing but time, a couple of people like made the multi-year journey out to spy on Napoleon and see what he was up to out there. And he's apparently just kind of pacing back and forth in his house, muttering out loud about whose fault it was that things went badly for him. And, just continue. So he's the farthest one out. I don't know. It's interesting. Why would he pick Napoleon as of all the people?
I really don't know. That's a good question. But I don't know.
I mean, is that kind of like so he has a guide. There's kind of there's a Divine Comedy act similarity to this with this tour that he's going to get.
Yeah.
And so who does Virgil take? Who's like does Dante have a corollary of somebody who's like cast into in the lowest circle of hell?
Trying to think. It's been a long time since I read Dante's Inferno.
I don't know. But anyway, he chose Napoleon.
Yeah, he chose Napoleon. And one of the things that really strikes me about the description of the people in hell is what Lewis is trying to do in some sense is to undo Dante. In other words, all of this imagery of pitchforks and fire, and
have to be that dramatic.
in Dante's case too, the lower regions of hell are actually ice. Mm-hmm. People are embedded in ice, but nevertheless, all the imagery is horrific. That hell is this place of just sheer physical torments. And of course, this is all the medieval imagery that we still live within, that hell is this complete place of physical, endless torments. And what Lewis is trying to say, I think what he's trying to do in this book is to say, that kind of makes hell unbelievable, right? Because why would a loving God create this eternal torture pit that people are literally suffering the pains of ice and fire and hemorrhoids and and endless cancer
Yeah.
and all
As if the deprivation of God wouldn't be enough.
yeah, well, exactly. And so this is what Lewis's point is making here is that hell is simply our separation from God. And the people who are in hell are actually in hell because they're just being themselves. It's an eternity of you being stuck being who you were on earth.
Yeah.
And all of your vices have now, you've become one with your vices. Let's put it that
Just
way.
a grumble.
Yeah, we're going to see this later with the character, the woman who's was a grumbler in life who has simply become a grumble.
Yeah.
The grumble itself.
Yeah. And then, so when you were saying that about like stuck with this, like there's no movement toward a greater good, like even just on a human level, like we get our satisfaction. Psychologists will tell you, like if you're not making progress like that's one of the main causes of depression, that you're not making steps toward a meaningful goal and you don't feel yourself moving in a good direction.
That's right.
So like to take that and then supernaturalize it and think about that in regards to heaven, that makes a ton of sense. And I was also thinking with you talking about the imagery, and how C.S. Lewis is maybe trying to strip away the idea that like it's just like earthly horrors to the utmost degree, that's what hell would be. Also, like don't think that because something doesn't appear so jarringly horrific that it's not actually horrific.
Exactly. In some sense, it reminds me of some stuff from Cardinal Newman, the great convert from Anglicanism to Catholicism in the 19th century. Cardinal Newman was very much of the opinion that if you find the sacraments and church and worshiping God in this life boring and dull and not worth your time, don't presume that you're going to automatically pursue heaven in the next life. In other words, if given a choice, when we pass into the next life, we're going to pass into the next life pretty much as we are now. And if we are presented with a choice post-mortem, Newman and Lewis are both kind of saying here, don't presume you're going to recognize evil for evil.
Yeah.
Or good for good.
Yeah. Because so you're saying with Newman talking about the things that you might find just like boring or stale, or because maybe is this a result of living in a world where things are sold? Is that we always want to think that something that is good is going to excite us in some new way, as opposed to there's something interfering with just the fullness that we get from something that is good.
Yeah, as a sidebar, you hear so many Catholics today complaining endlessly about how dull and horrible the Catholic Mass is, the liturgies are, the music is terrible. Why can't we do more of this? Why can't we do more? And that's why I don't go to church anymore, because the Mass is so boring.
I don't get anything out of it.
I don't get anything out of it. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's completely true. The liturgy can be quite dull and quite boring in the sense that the music is bad, the homily's bad, and so on and so forth. But maybe that's a moment when you're going to encounter God even more.
Yeah.
I sit there at a really horrible Mass in terms of music, lousy homilies, crying babies, all that kind of stuff. I look around the church and start praying for people. I don't know that person over there, but I don't know their story, but I bet there's some horror in there. And so, because we all have horror in our lives, so I'm going to pray for that person. And all of a sudden you're transported. And I'm no great saint. I'm just saying, and this is Newman's point, it's Lewis's point. We're putting the cart before the horse usually in our moral lives and in our worship lives. We're always seeking our own gain, and that's the exact opposite of the moral life.
Yeah, so instead of trying to be like a vessel that you're filling up, you become a conduit where like God's grace flows through you to others. That tends to be a more complete sense of what's the word?
This narrative then is all about Lewis going through various vices and showing how nefarious they are and how they work. They get into your soul like worms and eat away at it. And so anyway, so so they get on the bus.
Well, real quickly, so when you say like how nefarious they are, so I haven't read the Screw Tape Letters in a long time, but similar way is just like the subtleties. Like,
Yes.
so he's very
That's
big
the
on pointing out
genius of the
subtleties.
screw tape letters is that it's not the fanciful elements of it, with the demons corresponding with Satan and whatnot. It's Lewis's sheer perspicacity as an analyzer of human psychology, of the human moral psychology in particular, and how we justify everything in our own mind. And I think Lewis would also say, because he's not a Calvinist, he doesn't believe in total depravity. I think he would say the good elements within us are actually better than we think, and the bad elements are worse than we think. We don't often recognize the weight of the glory that is within us. We don't recognize the good that is within us. In other words, someone who doesn't take their evil seriously isn't going to take their goodness seriously either.
It's sort of like the person who's constantly feeling beat down if people don't praise them, or built up easily if people do, or whatever. Like if you're just hanging, you're not. Yeah, the scales tend to be off. They tend
Very
to be
much so.
Huh.
All right, so there's a few people
Bus.
in hell. They make it to the bus stop. They get on the bus, and it goes up to heaven, and they get off.
And that's it. Is that it?
Yeah.
They get off and they and our narrator starts interacting with the various people who are on their way up there.
Go ahead.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Just the first thing they notice is that
Oh yeah, it's
they're
unbearable
ghosts.
in a way.
Yeah, it's unbearable. The grass is hard to walk on. Water is hard to walk on.
Yeah.
Rain tears right through you.
They can see through themselves.
Green is greener in heaven. Blue is bluer. In other words, it's very, very, very. Lewis is making heaven is more real.
Yeah, they're comparatively unsubstantial.
Yeah, and they look like ghosts as compared to. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I don't. So he starts talking to the various people that he's on the bus with about like why they've made the trip. I think there's one guy who wanted to go up there he's hoping to basically find something he can sell in hell. And they don't really talk about it as hell, right? Like they're kind of being made aware of the reality of the situation in the contrast to where they are now.
Well, you remind me, because now I don't remember. Maybe you remember better. It seems like a lot of the ghost people from hell that are up there don't know that they're in hell. To them, that's just. But it seems like there were a couple characters that said, "Well, this is what they call hell," but
yeah. Well, there's the bishop. I think he's one of the conversations that really stood out for me was. So C.S. Lewis witnesses basically some of the people who came up from hell on the bus with him, then being met by the bright people or these people from heaven who are people that they knew on earth and are trying to encourage them to take some steps toward heaven despite all the stuff they're clinging to let that go and move in the direction of heaven. And one of my favorites is the bishop who is met by one of his intellectual confreres on earth who's just completely over. Like he's the essence of that sort of romantic hodgepodge of like
liberal theology, romantic sentimentalisms.
He's in a I guess a Church of England bishop, and he's his friend from Earth, his name was Dick, and Dick was telling him, he starts off by kind of accusing Dick of having been rigid toward the end of his life when he was on Earth, but surely he's given up, he's put that aside now, and Dick's like, what are you talking about, basically? Like, no, I've never been more confirmed in, like, what are you thinking? And the guy's like, well, you started to believe in a literal heaven and hell, and he's like, don't you believe in a literal heaven and hell? And he said, well, I suppose if this, that, and the other thing. And he's like, well, where do you think you've been? And he said, oh. And he's looking back to the jury place where they had been before. And he said, oh, you're saying that could have been heaven. Oh, I could see how we must live by hope, mustn't we, my dear boy? Yes, if dawn could be coming and those kinds of things. He's like, heaven, you were in hell. But so you couldn't even see that. So there's just all these wonderfully colorful interactions. And again, you could see yours or other people like, oh yeah, this is just like you were talking about with how easily we can trick ourselves into delineating good from evil. And C.S. Lewis just sort of dissects it, takes it apart, and holds it up next to it.
Absolutely. And to make a comparison once again with Cardinal Newman, Lewis was sort of involved with no, he wasn't really, but it's sort of allied with a kind of movement that was called the Oxford movement. And that was a movement among Christians in the UK to make Christianity more orthodox again. In other words, this creedal.
When was that?
Late 19th, early 20th century. The belief that only a creedal Christianity, a fully robust, orthodox creedal Christianity.
Creedal. It's just adhering
to the basic old-fashioned dogmas and doctrines of the church concerning Christ, the Trinity, salvation, the saints, the sacraments, the church, and so on. Because what's instructive is, why was that needed? It was needed because the Church of England had drifted into exactly what this character and his story is all about. So to contextualize, remember, Lewis taught at Oxford and Cambridge. He knows the academic world. He knows the academic world in particular with regard to philosophy and religious studies and theology and so forth. And he knows the Church of England, and he knows that, and we all now today also know in Catholicism and this kind of theologian, this kind of churchman. And so, oh dear boy, don't be smitten with these literal notions of heaven and hell. I mean, I knew theologians, professors of theology at places like Fordham and in the seminary and stuff, who denied the bodily resurrection of Christ. Oh, that was just a mythopoetic way of the New Testament saying that he lives on in our hearts and so on.
How can people? Where's the richness in life for something like that?
Yeah,
what
exactly.
do they do?
Yeah, that's why Lewis emphasized in other places. He goes, "Yeah, Christianity is a myth. It's a myth become fact, and that's the difference." But and that's what this bishop represents: that mamby-pamby, watered down, fake sophisticated, fake intellectualism. And ultimately, the bishop doesn't want to be in heaven because there aren't any more conversations of this intellectual sort.
He remembers he's got a little circle, a little theological circle going on down in hell, and he really needs to get back to them. They're maybe not the brightest people or whatever, but they depend on him to run their chats. Yeah, people. When I had my reversion to the faith in the late '90s, I was in Seattle, and I took a couple classes at Seattle University. It's a Jesuit school in Seattle, and I didn't know anything about orthodoxy and heterodoxy and conservative and liberal or anything like that. And I took an Old Testament class, and the class was taught by this guy who used to be a Methodist minister, and he spent a lot of time showing us pictures of him with Joan Baez in San Francisco in the 1960s. And this was a private school. But I was so hungry to be around people who were talking about the faith and to go deeper into my understanding of it that I shelled out some serious money to take a couple of classes just to, and then I'm talking to some guy who's just trying to basically brag about hanging out with Joan Baez, and and then he talked about the Sumerian this and that and everything, and just made a muddle. But it's weird because I didn't have any real. I mean, I grew up in the faith in the 70s and 80s, so it was all Jesus loves you, draw a flower. That was all my CCD until I was like, this isn't much of it.
Making dioramas of the resurrection with clothespin Jesus and stuff. Yeah,
yeah. When you're 14 and going through puberty, you're I think I could use my time differently.
Exactly.
I went to Dunkin'. I used to skip class. My mom would drop me off because when we got to be mature, 13-year-olds or whatever, we no longer went to Sunday school. We went to Monday evening classes. So it was my mom would drop me off, and she would drive away. And as she was driving away, my friend Jeff and I would watch the car go around the corner if my mom or his mom was driving us off. And then we would about face, and we would walk over to Dunkin' Donuts, and we'd spend an hour and a half there eating donuts, and then we would go back and stand out in front of the building for when we were going to get picked up.
Oh.
And in retrospect, I think what I ingested at Dunkin' Donuts was less sickeningly sweet than what I would have gotten in that
class. You
probably
saved yourself. Absolutely.
So going back to Seattle and Seattle U, somehow or another, by the grace of God, I was not seduced. I mean, I was older too, but to sit there with 19-year-olds being oh yeah, because that's what people want to hear. Oh, tell me more about Joan Baez. My mom loves Joan Baez. She'll be so happy to hear that my teacher is friends with Joan Baez.
Oh yeah. What is it and this is kind of what Lewis is writing about here. That there's a certain kind of Christian that thirsts for the faith not to be true. you know,
I think we're called sinners. I think that's the
yeah,
kind of
I mean,
Christian.
there's almost a desire. I mean, I saw this as a theology teacher, all right, and you'd say something fairly orthodox to the students, or reiterating some doctrine of the church, and there would be this wave of disappointment would come over them, like, oh,
There goes my Friday night. Now I'm culpable, I
yeah,
guess.
I thought you were going to say it is okay to have endless sex with whomever we please. Yeah, sorry, you fuddy-duddy. I'm done with this class now. And, so, but no, but seriously, when there's all these like survey after survey, of Catholics, what do you think of this issue, that issue? And then what you see is majority of Catholics don't believe anything, and they want the church not to believe anything anymore.
What does that even mean? Don't believe? Like, how much do people even wrestle with? Like, even engage?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
they hear the truth?
Yeah.
Do they consider the truth? Do they strive to live the truth? Like, there's so many steps that are just not even
But
presented
Lewis
with.
blames churchmen like this in this story.
I think they do bear
for,
a
in
lot
a
of blame.
sense, aiding and abetting this. Now, they didn't create the
They
dynamic
didn't
involved.
start the fire,
They didn't start the fire.
but they could have put it out.
It's been burning since the world's been turning. They could have put it out, yeah.
Just because you didn't start it doesn't mean you couldn't throw some water on it or maybe a blanket.
All right, so on to another character.
Oh yeah. So
he goes back to hell.
he
To
goes
hell
back
with
to
him.
Yes, he goes back to run his theological circle in hell. We mentioned the grumbler.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis feels really kind of bad for her, or the narrator feels kind of bad for her because he witnesses this thing where she's complaining. So she's frustrated. She has. She's just a woman who's got a lot that she doesn't feel like has gone her way, but she doesn't deserve to be in hell just because she complains, right? And by this time he's met George MacDonald, who is his guide for a good portion of the book through the vestibule of heaven. And George MacDonald explains to him that, well, if there's any chance that she's still there, that there's any spark that's still there, we'll fan away the ashes and get oxygen in there to reignite that fire. But there's a chance that she's not a grumbler, that she is gone and it's only a grumble.
That's she's become the grumble.
Can't go to heaven if you're just.
That
a grumble.
reminds me, in Lewis's book, The Problem of Pain, which you and I have discussed, in the chapters on hell that are in The Problem of Pain, he talks about the fact that what goes to hell isn't a human being, but what he says are the remnants of a human being. Like after you burn a log, what you have left isn't the log anymore, but the ashes of a log, the remnants of a log. And that's what he's saying. What you have in hell are the burned out remnants of a human being. Now, of course, the analogy limps because we're not a log, we're not physical. What does that mean when it's translated into the spiritual? What it means is you become reduced to your vices. You now are nothing more than your vice.
We feel that. I mean, you can feel yourself. You can feel that balance tipping in one direction or the other. You can feel the vices lessen. You can feel yourself becoming more human if you're attentive, and you can feel yourself becoming less human when you just kind of give into your vices along the way.
There is a version of a theory about hell that's in the Christian tradition that the Catholic Church doesn't believe in, but it's called annihilationism. Annihilationism is the belief that hell is nothing more than God snuffing you out. That when you die, you just go into blackness. You're just no more. It's like before you were born. You're a non-entity. You don't exist anymore. And to some extent, Lewis was a Christian Platonist, where he believes that the spiritual is more real than the unspiritual. Evil is simply a privation of the good that should be there. It's a lessening of the good. It's not. In other words, evil isn't a thing in and of itself. It's an absence. And so there's an element here in The Great Divorce and in all of Lewis's writings about hell. There's a slight Platonic emphasis here that the lower and lower and lower and lower you go in the chain of being, the less and less and less real things are.
Yeah.
To the point where if you're a sinner and you've become identified with your grumble, that you are nothing more than the grumble, that there may come a time when, poof, you're just gone.
Yeah.
And so maybe Lewis believes in hell, but not an eternal hell. That for those who don't make it to heaven, maybe they just go away. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that, or I have no proof or evidence that that was Lewis's, but you see elements of a kind of soft annihilationism here going on in Lewis, where he says it's the remnants of a human being that are in hell. And here this woman doesn't exist anymore. She's just, as George MacDonald said, there's no flame left in there to flame up. She's gone.
And that distinction, I mean, theologically, on some level, it matters greatly. Obviously, the truth matters ultimately. But as far as a practical approach to existence and sinfulness and striving for virtue and not giving in to our vices, like that is a very useful way of thinking about things, regardless of what the absolute truth is that we'll, please God, learn someday. You know, that's a very practical diminishment and increasing on our path, and I think also a very, I mean, it's not only good for navigation. It's also it's a rich way to live life, because it makes every day a challenge. It makes every day like I'm going to go for the virtue and try to stomp out the vice. Yeah, and I'll be more me tonight than I was this morning. How cool is that?
That's it. That's it. When we live virtuous lives, we become more ourselves, not less.
Yeah.
And when we live sinful lives, it becomes less ourselves, not more. We get it all wrong in our brains. We think, in order to be happy, I need to do these sins over here. Right. And goodness is, that's la la land. That's all for the peppermint candy crowd of Santa Claus floats and so on. That's not real. Real is down here in the dirt with and we get it. We get it. I mean, the fact is, look at the word diabolical. Diabolos is the two words that it comes from, and that literally means to throw apart, to throw something apart, to take it apart and toss the bits into the wind. Wow. Diabolos, to cast apart. And so the essence of the diabolical is that it takes our form, imprinted with the image and likeness of God, and through sin, to gradually disintegrate that form, to throw it apart. And is that not true? When we sin and lead lives of sin, and I'm not talking about great sins, I'm just talking, when we succumb to them, do we not feel, what's the word, dissipated?
Yeah,
right. You can take... all of it, and you can string
Since
together.
we have visuals, I can do this.
You
I don't
can
need
string
words.
together like day after day after day after day of essentially doing nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you
just
suddenly
get thinner
feel
and thinner
disappointed.
and thinner.
Yeah. You're dissipated. Diabolos. You're thrown apart. And you become grossly unhappy.
Yeah. Less yourself, thrown apart. Yeah, because we're made to be this completion, this wholeness that then is a part of a greater completion.
And that's part of Lewis's Platonism here to why heaven is more real. Ultimately, the real has form. It has structure. God actually has a form and a structure. It's just infinite, and it's beyond our capacity. But we often try to think of God, and when we do, we image him as like this, amorphous gas.
Right. If you get past the man with the beard, then you go to like, well, he's not actually physical, so he's just.
It may the force be with you. It's just, that's why I hate.
That was a good movie. Did you see that?
Yeah, Star Wars. But I mean, notice. I mean, that's too. Star Wars. The Force is an impersonal thing that it's in all things, Luke. It permeates everything. But notice, it's also like a faucet with hot and cold water. The Force apparently doesn't give a damn about us, because there's an evil side and there's a good side to the Force. Come to the dark side, Luke, and all that. See the power of the dark side, and all that. Yeah. And all you got to do is learn certain Jedi techniques to tap into the good side, or Darth Vader techniques to tap into. It's like turning on a hot or cold spigot. All right, and evidently the Force doesn't care who's turning on what spigot and for what purpose.
That's pretty impersonal.
Yeah, it's very, very impersonal, and that's kind of what Lewis is driving at to here. In all of this, that no, God has a form, and that form is goodness.
And the more good we become, the more
we have a form, and our form is oriented towards goodness. Evil is a privation, a deprivation, a secondary reality. It is not the other part of the faucet that I can just turn on if I want to, and it's of equal power. Lewis discusses that a lot in Mere Christianity, where he talks about dualism, an evil power and a good power, as that version of religion which is like the closest rival to Christianity. It's because how we naturally think. There's a good power and there's a bad power.
Why is that such a temptation for us? Why do we tend to think that way?
Because it's not completely self-evident to us, right? That life is
There's something pulling us this way. There's something pulling us
that life isn't anything more than an equipoise of good and evil. Maybe because we lack eyes to see the goodness all around us, eyes to see with gratitude that 99.9% of our day is filled with nothing but blessing, and that it's not pain and suffering all the way down.
Our fallenness blinds us to that.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, is it self-evident that goodness is the more primary reality? I think you have to think your way to that.
And it kind of depends. And it can definitely depend on what the situations you find yourself in at any given time and any day. Inside, internally, externally, there's a lot of stuff that plays into that. Yeah, sometimes it has to be an act of will to see that.
And that's why worship is so important, because worship instills in us gratitude.
Yeah, that's the key to seeing.
One of the key. I see this in my life all the time. The number one thing that causes in me to grumble is when I lack gratitude. Every single day we need to step back and say, what I need to praise God for the good things in my life and to have gratitude for them. Because as soon as you stop doing that, our mind for some reason gravitates towards all the bad stuff that's happening to me.
Yeah.
It's like, we all have this experience, right? And I had it as a teacher. You could have a class of 25 kids. And at the end of the semester, you get 25 student evaluations, and 24 could say, greatest teacher ever. And there'd be one evaluation say, I hated this guy, full of himself. Who in the heck does Dr. Chapp think he is? But the worst teacher I ever had. And man, do you fixate on that one.
It's true. And meanwhile, when we're properly oriented, if there were 24 bad ones and one good one, that one good one would be really actually quite nourishing. It's kind of like a glass of water in the desert versus like being in an ocean. You're like, oh, well, there's water, And I guess that's not a good analogy if you're drinking the water, but if you're just looking to be cooled off with a lake in a clean mountain lake. But yeah, like that the gratitude can always be there, because we can always find a thimble of water, which a thimble of cold water in the desert after you've been without it for a week is way more appreciated than
Amen, brother.
Lake when you live next to
Maybe
it
we should move on to
mansion.
one of the other characters.
All right. Do you have a favorite? Well, there's one character that is really that we spend the most time with. Maybe we'll save him for last.
We'll come back to him.
There's go ahead. Did you have one that you were?
What about I like the woman who wanted to control her husband.
Yeah. Yes. She.
Her husband was in heaven.
He was in heaven. Yeah.
And she's in hell.
And she's in hell, and she wants him. She wants him back to hell, because she doesn't really have a purpose now that she no longer has him to control. And she's telling the bright person who's meeting her all the good that she did for him as far as establishing his status and getting him away from his ne'er-do-well friends, and should
he had
get
a
him a
perfectly
nice
good
house.
job, but she wanted him to have a better job and a better job and a better job.
His friends weren't advancing him. They just wanted to hang out and talk and have a drink. And, he needed to hang out with the proper set so that he could advance in the world. And he had to work longer hours so he could live in a nice house that he didn't really want to live in. And it was a lot to keep up, but surely it was a nicer house than they had before. And if she could just have him back, and then she finally comes to, well, maybe I'll be willing to go to heaven if you'll let me have Adam again, basically.
Let me do it. Let me do it. No, you can't.
She even says in there, like, I must have someone to do things to.
Yeah, I know. I must have. Yeah, I was laughing out loud when I read that. And the thing is, as Lewis is describing this woman, you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, this man is in heaven precisely because because he didn't kill her. He didn't kill her.
Although there is one person who's in heaven who did kill somebody.
That's right. And isn't that the very first one?
It is, yeah. He was like the underling of some factory worker or some boss who was like a hard-nosed boss. He was the hard man, I think he was described as. And he meets this guy, Len, I think it was. He says, I'll be damned. Basically, when he sees that Len is in heaven and he's in hell. Yeah. And he says, how could you be here? You killed poor Jack, and he's like, I sure did, and he's totally free of the guilt of it and everything.
That's right.
He's like, yep, I can look at it square away. And I did. And the guy's like, well, I should be before you. And he says, well, maybe you will be. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't even really care. I'm just so
Come on
happy to
up.
be here. Come on up. And the guy's like, no way. I can't go to a place where if they let you in. Yeah.
Yeah, so Lewis's point there, is that once again, to refer back to his book, Mere Christianity, in a chapter called Christianity and Psychoanalysis, he points out that, the moral act is complex. And we have to be culpable for the moral act in order to be judged for it. And that means you have to be free of psychological impediments and constraints. And a lot of people are not as free as they appear to be outwardly, that they have compulsions and obsessions. So Lewis says, we never quite know the state of anybody's soul. That's what we mean with judge not lest you be judged, because you don't know how constrained another human being's freedom might be. So Lewis says, in the next life, there are going to be surprises. Yeah. Mother Teresa's in hell and Hitler's in heaven. Okay, and he doesn't use those examples, obviously, but I'm using extreme examples here. But for all we know, Mother Teresa did everything. Obviously, she's a saint of the church, so she's in heaven, so she's probably a bad example. But bear with me here, all right? Assuming there was no proclamation of her sainthood. I mean, maybe Mother Teresa was doing everything she did for vainglory, for purposes of fame and whatever.
The path was greased in some easy way.
Yeah, and so
she could have gone farther or whatever.
And maybe Hitler was actually psychologically deranged, not at all in control of his actions, a complete psychological cripple who was compelled along by various psychotic obsessions. We don't know. Lewis says, obviously, I'm not predicting that to be true. I'm just using that as
But we should want it to be true, actually, because we should want that.
I don't want Mother Teresa in hell.
No, we should want Hitler to be in heaven.
To be in heaven.
We should want him to have been so contrite. We want to hear that story from him. Could you imagine his conversion story?
Isn't this the point, too, of this very first thing? And you get this all the time from so many Catholics these days, where it's almost as if they want people to be in hell. You start saying we should hope for the salvation of all. Oh, we shouldn't. That's a horrible thing to say.
Yeah.
Hell.
We're all insecure to some degree.
So you try to say to some Catholics, I hope Hitler's in heaven. And they go nuts. They turn blue in the face. And how dare you say I'm like Hitler? And that's what Lewis is talking about here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go to heaven if Hitler's there. Right. What good is a heaven if a Hitler is there? Right.
Yeah.
I don't think Hitler's there, but he damn well might be.
It'd be an incredible thing. I mean, people watch, TV shows to hear like a criminal who had a conversion, and that people get frequently the same kind of personality that would say, Hitler couldn't possibly be in heaven, I wouldn't want to be there, are also like, you should hear the story of this guy. He was like this gangbanger and he did this and that, but then he found Christ or whatever. We love those stories.
Yeah.
And so just because those stories happen, we witness them here on earth. I mean, it'd be of the same type, like just to the nth degree. If somebody like Hitler, like somewhere along the line at his death, in some moment that God gives him between him, if he had that sort of a conversion, that would be, that would be like the most incredible story you could ever hear.
It would, because he not only was responsible for the brutal genocidal catastrophe that swept over Europe. He was responsible for hundreds of millions of dead people, hundreds of millions. And then, of course, he committed suicide at the end of his own life. So it would be an incredible miracle of grace. And obviously, salvation cannot be compelled. He had to choose to go to heaven at some point, and so it would be highly unlikely that he did. But.
No, I know. See, you can't even really have this conversation sometimes without it being like, oh, you're downplaying the severity of sinfulness. No, I'm upplaying the glory of God's merciful love is what I'm trying to do.
And it's shocking to say this, but Christ died for every single one of Hitler's sins.
Yeah. Wow.
Hitler's sins were all forgivable.
Yeah, so don't diminish Christ in some way.
Don't diminish Christ. How this is great. I hadn't even thought of this before, but this is really an insight that you're having here, Marcus, because don't diminish Christ. Because when we think about probably the greatest murderer in all of history, Adolf Hitler, probably one of the most evil human beings, was probably second only to Satan himself on the hierarchy of evil. Just a despicable, disgusting man, and yet there's not a thing that he ever did that Christ didn't die for. Wow, think about that.
Yeah, think about that on Good Friday.
Yeah, that's the depth of horrificness that Christ descended into in order to save every last sin. It's incredible. And that's kind of what Lewis is saying here in this very first story. You know, there's not a sin he didn't die for.
Yeah.
And if you're saved and you're in heaven, you'd be the first one to say, "Yep, I did that."
Yeah. Yeah. The
Oh, yeah.
amount of gratitude and love you would have for having that lifted off of you.
Yeah.
Coming to
Oh, yeah, that was me. It's not me now. Come on up, brother.
Yeah. Well, the story in here that I don't know why, for some reason, that I find the most haunting, I think it might be the last story, is the one of the tragedian. There's this beautiful woman. There's this incredibly beautiful woman that we're introduced to who has like a train of people and animals and everything who are just kind of following her and and just loving her.
And you think it's the Virgin Mary or something.
He kind of hints at like, could that be, is that, and then George MacDonald cuts the narrative off. He's like, no, he knows what he's thinking. Like, is that Mary? Is that Christ's mother? No, that's Sally Smith from Gables Gardens or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's
Mrs. McGillicuddy from Grove City.
Yeah. But she just loved everyone and everything that crossed her path.
Yeah.
And now we see her for who she is here in heaven, and just the light that is coming out of her, and the harmony she has with all this beauty and goodness up here it's overwhelming. Like, yeah, I mean, frequently the narrator expresses like that he's emotionally moved beyond his ability to communicate it. And then she encounters the person that she's meeting is it's two people. There's one person one little kind of
dwarfish,
saddish, pathetic looking person who seems at first glance to be on a string of some sort of grandiose, he calls him the tragedian because he talks and he just speaks in these very long-winded ways about how his love for what was it? So basically, the long and the short of it is, it's actually the person is actually this little kind of sheepish, sad character, but he's got this persona that he kind of has, I guess, been projected during his life that got in the way of his contact with reality and his growth as a human being. So the tragedian is constantly speaking in these big, grandiose lines and everything. And there's just this little guy behind there. And he's actually the one holding the string of the tragedian because that's like his puppet. That's the face that had been put on during his life. But she's just trying to she's trying to communicate with the little guy who was her husband.
Yeah.
This little sad, pathetic guy. But he's constantly having this, or it's so habituated by that point that he can only put on this big false persona.
Yeah.
And the little guy, he's just desperate to have some actual connection and some communication. He wants to feel validated in some way because the other guy's obviously just this blowhard who was putting on airs. He was acting like he was something special, but he was obviously just a weak little self-esteemless, desperate for validation character who was married, I guess, to Sally Smith of Gables Gardens or whatever. And we see a couple of opportunities for the little real person to kind of come to life, but just this persona has gotten in the way forever, and eventually he just sort of floats up on this string that he had created this person, and he had put him on this string, and he had held that out as his interaction with the world. But eventually, the false persona overrules the real person, and he just sort of gets so small that he's just like blowing like a little piece of tissue on the end of the string until we can't see him anymore.
Yeah, I think so many things in that story. One is just with regard to the holy woman, the spirit. Lewis's point is so much, probably the majority of holiness is hidden in this life. That we tend to think that holiness is going to be associated with these grandiose saints and heroic saints and martyrs and things like that. No. For the vast, vast majority of people, the pathway to holiness is just the ordinariness of your day-to-day life.
Just doing faithfully the work that's in front of you.
The little way of St. Therese, just cleaning toilets and making dinner, and this is a path to sanctity for most people, and especially perhaps even the more hidden holiness is, the more humble it is. The humble circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have, he's received his reward, and then the person who's blowing the trumpet on the street corner or whatever.
Yeah. And then that's in comparison to this dwarfish little guy with the tragedian that is his false self, where there's nothing, in some sense, his desire is not to be hidden.
Right.
His desire is
not to be content with that.
Yeah, he wants this.
He wants recognition. He wants
the recognition, this grandiose persona,
so it's quite a contrast
that he presents to the world, which is so fake and ephemeral and non-humble, and
it's hilarious because it's so ridiculous, and yet it's so
theatrical.
Pathetic. Yeah.
That's why it's tragedy.
Yeah.
It's theatrical.
Right.
It reminds me of an old Saturday Night Live skit where John Lovett was dressed up as the devil, and he was always so grandiose. I'm the devil, And of course, it's silly, but it was kind of making a similar point here: is that evil can be this wild gesticulation, this very public thing.
It can grab your attention, but there's not really much there.
Hey, look at me! Look at me!
Yeah.
I'm the devil.
And I wonder how deeply John Lovitz was thinking about that when he came up with that character. I want to talk to him. We'll have
I
him
don't
on
think
Die
he was
Human.
thinking this, no, because he played the same character no matter
That's
what.
who he always was.
So I think it was his John. Hello, yes, but still, it makes a great devil.
So yeah, those two are really contrasted with, and her, her desire for him to be with her in heaven, and when because the way that we're introduced to them, she is so glorious and he is so pathetic, and her, well, it shows her glory in some ways too. It's just like her desire to just get him to put that tragedy, cut that string and just start to increase who he actually is.
The way Lewis describes that poor little dweeb is just pathetic.
You needed me.
Yeah, it's sad. He's a sad little fella.
Yeah. That's such a
Let's move on to the lizard dude.
The lizard dude. The lusty lizard?
Well, wait a minute. Who was the person that we're not certain whether she chose heaven or hell? I can't remember now.
Oh, yeah. That was with the unicorns. So that was the woman who was consumed. She could only think about herself. She could only think about herself. So they were basically like, well, the last thing to kind of pull out all the stops was like, even just to distract her, like just like a herd of unicorns suddenly comes trouncing through, just like get her mind off herself by any means possible.
And at that point, Lewis is sort of the narrator of the story, walks away, doesn't see the end, doesn't see what happens. And also what is intriguing is that the woman who is selfish, there isn't necessarily any particular vice that is pointed out about her. It's just that she's
just consumed with herself.
Just consumed with herself. So I've often wondered, what is Lewis trying to say here about, because everybody else, you can tell, other than the lizard dude we're going to talk about in a second, chooses to go back to hell. It's very clear that, okay, I can't be bothered with this pseudo-sophisticated heaven thing. I'm going back to the real world, which is hell.
So why does he choose to leave that particular one up in the air?
Why is this particular character left hanging? I don't know, because her sin is self-absorption. Yeah, that everything, refers back to herself. So I've never quite figured out what it was Lewis was trying to say, because it was obviously this was not by accident.
Right. No, that
her character is left hanging. So anybody listening to this maybe can write to us and say, we'll have a contest. Why was her case left hanging?
The vice or that particular.
Because the unicorns come crashing down and it distracts her.
And it's even a little.
Why unicorns?
Just like all of a sudden there's these unicorns running through there.
Yeah, and why unicorns? Does that have some symbolic meaning of any kind? I don't know. Well, let's get on to the lizard dude.
Yeah, the lizard dude. So the lizard dude stands out just because we go into a fair amount of detail, but yes, because also this is one where the vice is overcome, the sin is overcome, and the lizard. So we meet a guy who he's like kind of oily,
They
greasy.
oily and greasy.
Yeah, so everybody's
I
unsubstantial.
think today the kids would say he's sketchy.
he's sketchy. So there's a sketchy dude, and he happens to have a lizard on his shoulder.
Yeah.
And the lizard is sort of talking into his ear. And he's met by a bright spirit, an angel, who is inviting him forward. And he's like, well, I can't really do it. I can't really go any farther. I've got this little chap, which is a funny way to refer to a lizard on your shoulder. This little chap wouldn't do. I knew it wouldn't do to bring him. And we find out that the lizard is representative of lust. And
sexual lust.
Yeah. So it's very clear in this that's the guy's oily. He's got this lusty lizard on his shoulder, chattering in his ear, whispering things in his ear. And he's very self-conscious that he can't really go forward with the lizard. But it's not saying maybe I should leave the lizard. But the angel says, like, well, may I kill it? Shall I kill it? Yeah. And he starts kind of double dealing and side talking, like, well, that would be a possibility, but that's kind of extreme. And
let's not lose our heads here, shall we?
He's quieting down. Maybe he'll just be quieter a little bit. And it is a really great description and just look inside of how and lust particularly, because especially, we're living in such a pornified culture, to think about the way that it really does infect us at a deep level, and it can, and our reticence, our feeling that, because he even says this in here to some degree, that if we let go of that, we're letting go of something that it means to be human, because sexuality is such it
feels natural
part of what
to
it
you
is.
too.
Yeah,
it feels natural.
Yeah,
whatever your sexual fetish, orientation, desire.
Yeah, it feels very intertwined with who you are.
Yeah, it's like there's no sense in which I somehow added this on, as an add-on to my life. That's not your sexual urges seem to come from some deep wellspring
they do.
Of who you are.
And then they get twisted a little bit, all of them, all of us.
And then they're all
degree,
twisted.
Greater or lesser or whatever. But they are so essential to who we are created to be.
And also, for some bizarre reason, we tend to think, although it's not true, that our sexual sins or whatever are things that we can compartmentalize.
Right.
In other words, I think this is why he thought he could bring the lizard with him to heaven. I mean,
he did get on the bus.
I might be, say, hopelessly addicted to pornography, or I might be someone who's constantly cheating on my wife, or with women at work and other places. But somehow or another, I feel like I can still go out and lead a normal life because I've got this part of my life neatly compartmentalized, hidden, sequestered, and I can deal with. I'll deal with it, but outwardly. So, for example, we all know this is why we're all surprised, for example, when somebody gets arrested for, some guy gets arrested for trying to hook up with a 14-year-old girl online or something. You're like, oh my God. I've known many.
Because people knew him, they never would have expected.
Yeah, we never would expect. For example, I went to seminary with a guy named Jim Jackson, greatest convert to the faith, unbelievably funny guy, smart, personable. Everybody was his friend. He and I were really, really great friends. Bishop Jim Conley of Lincoln, Nebraska was also our friend, and he and I and Jim were really, really close. And Jim Jackson got ordained a priest. He became a kind of traditionalist priest, said the Latin Mass, this kind of stuff. Well, 2 years ago, he was arrested for possession of child pornography and is now sitting in a jail in Rhode Island, serving, I think, a 5-year sentence for possession of child porn. And he pleaded guilty to it and said, yes, I've had this problem for many years now. And so the thing that strikes you is that was his lizard. And he felt like he could present himself as a priest in public. And you think, well, how could he do that? Because he probably knew he had a problem. He probably knew this was immoral. He probably knew that I should not be doing this. And he may have even confessed it 10,000 times, okay? But that was his lizard on his shoulder that he thought he could bring with him. But as the angel said, no, this is a sin you have to kill.
You got to kill it.
You have to kill it.
Yeah, and I can't kill it. The angel can't kill it for you. You have to kill it, or you have to agree
consent
to
to
kill
it. And there's another deep psychology here. One of the reasons why it's so hard to overcome sexual sins is because you don't really will it.
Right.
It's part of that. This is really who I am.
Well, this is interesting because I mean, if somebody's sexual orientation is such that I don't know if I was going to say they call themselves or we call them or whatever, like we actually have categories that we put people in based on their sexual orientation. Like it's that big a definition of how we see what it means to be human. As opposed to this is a man who likes men. We say this man is a gay man. Like it defines a person.
We essentialize it. It becomes who you are. That's why it's really wrong to start talking about our sexual proclivities as our identities.
Yeah.
I don't care, hetero,
us.
homo, whatever. It's who you are. Oh, I hope not. I sure as heck hope not. And it's actually one of I think the chief problems with our culture today is this constant desire to so naturalize our sexual vices by, in a sense, saying that that's who you are, that's your identity. But notice anyway, I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
But that's what Lewis is saying here.
He's pointing out that this is subtle. You think you can handle it. You think that you can compartmentalize it, like you're saying. I didn't think about the fact that he had to choose to get on the bus, knowing the lizard was on his shoulder. He said, "I thought to Chapp, maybe
I can
he
manage
come
this
or whatever," but he still went. He didn't say like, "I'm not going to present myself. I don't want to be seen with this thing on my shoulder." It's like he's probably thinking it's pretty small and maybe it'll be quiet or whatever. Like,
and how it's the lizard is always whispering in his ear.
And he'll start to look toward the angel, and he'll start to kind of agree and acquiesce, but then a little whispers, and he's like gets a little smile on his face or whatever, and he's like,
and it kind of represents, what St. Paul says, in the New Testament, where it says, the sensuous person, the man of flesh, cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven, and Lewis is kind of saying here that the man is constantly looking to the Spirit. He wants to go to heaven. He's looking that way. But the reason why he can't go to heaven is because the lizard talking in his ear has drawn his eros downwards. Oh. All right, instead of agape drawing him upwards, the whispering of eros drags him down. It's an either or. That's what Lewis is saying here. It's an either
ultimately.
Or. Either or. And that's another thing. We tend to downplay these days what we call sins of the flesh. And it's not just sexual sins. It would be any kind of addictive behavior with regard to...
It's like seeking a physical pleasure.
Sensual body, drinking too much, smoking too much. All these... We live in this sensuous culture that it so emphasizes bodily pleasures.
How related to that? Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, how related to that do you think is that there's something for sale in all of those areas? Like there's money to be made off of all of those, exploiting those temptations and those weaknesses.
That's why in some of my writings, I refer to it as the collective of concupiscence. It's a collective in the sense that our entire consumer-based capitalist culture is oriented around the idea of selling things to people that they don't really need. And you want them to want it, which means you want them to feel like they need it. And therefore, you have to inflame desire. So we have an entire culture and economic system grounded in concupiscence, grounded in this inflaming of the lower elements of our nature.
It would be a very sobering number, would be to find out, because we frequently think about the power of our country based on its GDP. How much of our GDP is based on pornography, alcohol, all these things, compared to the countries that we're like, well, we're a much bigger country because look at our GDP compared to other countries that actually make something that is useful and good, and ours being based on just feeding our lowest appetites.
I wouldn't know what the answer to that question is. I know we make also cars and aeroplanes.
we do, but I wonder it might be a really startling, because
but
I know that
it would be. I know, right? The porn industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So is cigarettes and booze, but it's not just limited to, physical acts like eating, drinking, smoking, having sex. The entire culture of consumerism is also kind of sensuous in the sense that Lewis is talking about here, in the sense that we tie our happiness to the acquisition of material things. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily have to be the enticing of certain
sinful
bodily
things.
excitations, It can simply be a constant obsession with buying things
Yeah.
and feeling like I need to buy these things.
Yeah. And that's pretty, that's related to, there's a lusting after things that aren't sexual, right? I mean,
That's right. But this dude finally tells the angel to kill.
Barely. I mean, at first he says, like, couldn't you have just killed it quick? Like, Flannery O'Connor has that quote, she could never be a saint, but she thought maybe she could be a martyr if they killed her quick.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that in there, which
That's
is like,
right.
couldn't you have just, like, taken the lizard out when I wasn't expecting it? Kind of like, you know, when you have something that's hard, you don't want to separate from it. You don't, if you know it's coming, then it's extra painful.
Can't I be redeemed without my cooperation?
Yeah, or at least...
Can't you just wave a magic wand and do this, Lord? And God could. And think about this. God could have saved us in any number of ways. He didn't have to save us the way that he did. God easily, after Adam and Eve sinned, he could have done, in golf, the golf term for a do-over is a mulligan. Yeah. You slice it way to the right, and it's in 5 fairways over, and you don't want to go looking for it. And your golf mates say, "Oh, that's a do-over. We're all sluggers here. We're all duffers here. Let's just okay, do-over." Well, God could have said to Adam and Eve, "That's a mulligan." And if they sinned again, boys will be boys, girls will be girls. That's a mulligan. That doesn't take us seriously.
Yeah.
We have to cooperate in our salvation, and that's the manner God chose to save us. And that's why the angel won't kill that lizard until the dude says, "Kill it,"
which he finally does.
Yeah,
he finally does, and he says he feels like he's dying. He says, does he say like, "Oh my God"? I can't remember what he said, how he responds to it, but he like just, and he doesn't have to like recite a long affirmation of agreement to consent to the killing. He just whimpers out like, "Okay, basically just do it. Go ahead."
Yeah.
And then he's like screaming and he's like almost, that he collapses, I think. And the lizard gets flung away and its back is broken. And then he sees the man start to take shape as an actual man. He sees him start to form.
Yeah.
But he says that he didn't see him fully take shape because he got distracted. And what he got distracted by was the lizard wasn't actually dead. He thought that its back was broken, it was dead, but he looks over and it's kind of moving around a little bit, and then he sees that it's changing too. And it changes from a lizard into a horse. It turns into a stallion, this like magnificent stallion, and then he looks back and the man is a full man, like giant, and the stallion, and they're united, and they're like I think they're breathing each other's air.
Yeah.
And then he mounts the stallion and he rides off into the mountains to like music. And it's, I guess, Lewis's way of saying that, like, well, this thing is a good thing.
Yeah.
But when it's twisted, it's a terrible little lizard chattering in your ear.
Eros.
But it's something that can be ridden into heaven.
It's Lewis's commentary on the old question of Eros and its role in our lives. And he's really saying there's a razor's thin difference, a razor edge thin difference between erotic lust and erotic desire for infinite goodness. Eros, in other words, isn't oriented towards sex. Eros as a category is oriented towards all of our deepest passions. Ask yourself that, why did God create us with passions, emotions, a huge desire? We can have a lust for goodness, all right, and in a good sense. Mm-hmm. And so what Lewis is saying is, don't disparage having profound desires for things. But yes, it's that they get disoriented. It's not a proper hierarchy. Mm-hmm. You're sacrificing great goods to lower goods, and so everything gets jumbled. I also think Lewis is commenting here on the nature of addiction. Like drug addiction, for example, it's part of our sensuous orientation. Mm-hmm. We've all heard the phrase, right, "I need to get this monkey off my back." Mm-hmm. Well, get the lizard off my shoulder. But being drug addicted is often depicted as, "I've got a monkey on my back," or whatever. And then I just need to kill. In other words, all other vices, you could maybe say, I can gradually morph from this vice into some other virtue. I can take baby steps on that way. But no, I think anybody that's like an alcoholic addicted to alcohol, or a heroin addict addicted to heroin, you have to kill it. And you can no longer compartmentalize it and dabble in it. No. You can't say, oh, to heck with my alcoholism. I'm just going to have a few beers here tonight with the boys. You can't do that. And that's why they have buddies in alcoholic.
Yeah.
So I'm about to fall off the wagon. You need to get down here right away because I need help because you have to kill that. You have to kill it. And that's what Lewis is. But once you kill it, boom, the sense of liberation sends you to heaven.
Kill the lizard.
Kill the wabbit.
Was that what that was really? I have to rewatch that Bugs Bunny
watch the
cartoon.
Kill the wabbit. No, I don't think that's what that.
No, you don't think so? You never know if you go back with fresh eyes and watch those Warner Brothers cartoons.
Yeah, they're larded with all kinds of hidden meanings.
Well, that's a wonderful book, The Great Divorce, and time to seek out those. Let's get away from these muddy waters. The waters are plenty muddy, but there's no marriage of heaven and hell. They have to be divorced. Got to see.
That's right.
Work toward virtue, embrace virtue.
Yeah.
Get rid of the vice.
It will make you happy.
Yeah. Well, the world's crying for happiness.
One last thing, though, about the guy with the lizard, though, too. A lot of psychologists who treat addictions and so forth point out that one of the grave difficulties in getting people to overcome addictions is that when you first give up something, whether it's booze or sex or smoking, so on, it's like a miniature death. Mm-hmm. It really is
because it's become so intertwined with your habits.
At first, the first step in overcoming an addiction is to just kill it. But at first, after cold turkey, I'm throwing my cigarettes away. At first, it just feels like deprivation. At first, it just feels like something is missing from your life. Yeah. Something that brought you happiness is gone.
There's all those associations. There's so much.
Oh, yeah. And so it feels like a miniature death. You're depressed. You're morose until you finally overcome and then replace it with something good. And that in the psychology of overcoming addictions, you must find a replacement for what you found pleasurable. You have to find it's got to be a replacement in a higher higher register of some kind. And if you don't, so it's gonna. In other words, you have to go through a purgation.
Well, that's great that Lewis shows that in there. I mean, it's obviously it happens quickly, but he shows like there's an agony.
There's going to be an agony. Yeah.
It's so sad when I mean, I've experienced it in my own family in a really terrible way. It's just that to think about not being able to kill that lizard, when please God,
I think it's a
mercy.
Source of a lot of suicides. Despair. I think there's the statistics show a lot of drug-addicted people eventually kill themselves, and I don't think they kill themselves necessarily in a drug-addicted stupor. I think it's a sense of despondency and despair.
It's the only way
overcome it. You overcome it. Only do it again. Overcome it. Do it again. And you can only fall so many times before you lose hope that you can ever throw this monkey off your back. And then you say to yourself, "I can't live like this anymore." There's only one way to release this monkey, this lizard.
I got to take me and the lizard out.
I got to take me and the lizard out.
Yeah, can't even see the separation anymore. Can't see the difference between us.
Yeah.
Well, God have mercy on us for that, because there's plenty of vultures, feeding off of putting people into those situations. So let's be merciful to each other when we see somebody who's really struggling. Well, all right. So here's to the divorce of vice and virtue, and building up that virtue. Friday, faith. It's not Friday today. Today, what day? What day is it? Saturday.
Today is Saturday.
I don't even know.
The wrong
it's been such
thing
a weird
there.
week.
I know, it is a weird week.
We've been putting our podcast out on Friday. I make these signs, I call them virtue signals. So
that's clever. I see them up there. Yeah. Thursday is forward. Saturday is hope.
Saturday's hope.
Saturday is hope. All right.
So I have this whole little. Made these a couple years ago. I haven't really done anything with them, but the idea is that see how it says, "In the world, but not of it," and then these hang off of it. Steven, I think, taped this on the table so that it wouldn't move around. But the idea being that, like, each day in our house, we put a different one up Monday through Sunday. How many days in a week are there?
I want one of those.
And so you could say, today I'm going to focus on this virtue. I'm going to try to build this virtue. at each day, just get a little bit, just remind
That's
yourself that's something that you could take an active pursuit in that.
And then when it comes around again the next week, you realize, I failed.
Yeah.
I got to do this again.
But hopefully, with whatever time God has given us, we can continue to build
That's
up
right.
and move in the right direction. But
Very good.
yeah, so thank you very much, Larry. It's
You're welcome. This is great.
And hopefully the audio worked. The video looks like it's working. Thank you to everyone who has stayed with us during this conversation. Highly recommend the book, The Great Divorce. Let's all be together in heaven.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.